Hey, Stewart's Chapel. This is Don Pierson and Don Counts, and we're at my home today filming. This is Wednesday's devotion. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, one verse. No temptation has overtaken you, talking to his believers there at Corinthians, God's children, except such as is common to man. Now, if there was a period there, you and I would just scratch our head and say, you mean that the same temptation that I had before I became a Christian is the same temptation I have now? Well, the answer would be yes. The same temptation that is common to all mankind, you and I have. But we're God's children. And says, but God is faithful. Well, what's He faithful in? Who will not allow you, that's His children, to be tempted beyond what you are able. In other words, you and I are going to be tempted with all the things, but we have the Holy Spirit where we didn't before. We have the Holy Spirit convicting us, telling us, you need to back away from that. You need to move away from that. We have His drawing, His tugging, His pushing. We have other believers telling us, you don't need to go that. You don't need to do that. Now, all that only works if you fill your life with other believers and if you listen to the conviction of the Holy Spirit. The other thing is we have the written word, something that the disciples didn't even have. And you and I are able to read it. But again, it's not going to help you unless you read it. We also have preachers and teachers. But again, those aren't going to help you unless you sit under preachers and teachers. Well, let's read the rest of it. But with the temptation, He will always make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. I'm going to share several stories. They're all kind of intertwined and connected. Have you ever been lost? I mean physically lost. I'm not talking about because you didn't look for instructions or look at a map. I'm not talking about driving around and being lost. I mean literally lost to the place where a little fear, maybe a lot of fear, comes in. I've been lost several times, unfortunately, generally when I was hunting. I was hunting up in Illinois one time and had gone into an area. It wasn't far from my family's place where we had been hunting, but I had crossed into an area. The fence evidently was down. I don't even remember crossing a fence. Had gotten over in some deep woods, found a good spot. I thought where I was one place, but it wasn't. I climbed up that tree with my deer stand. I got ready. I hunted that evening. Well, I got down right at dusk and started to move out, and evidently I got turned around because I could not find my way out. I wandered in the dark with my flashlight forever, and I could not find it. I came up on a ridge, and I saw a floodlight off in the distance, and I decided to head for that floodlight. And sure enough, there was a man actually who had just gotten home from work. He saw my light. I think he already knew immediately what it was. He put my stuff in his back of his truck, and he drove me home, and I was about 5 miles from where I was supposed to be. I do not even to this day know how I got to where I was. Sometimes you and I are led away into danger because we're not paying attention. But when God shines a light for us, it's probably best for us to head towards that light. The same thing happened in North Carolina. I hadn't been in North Carolina very long, pastoring, and had been invited to go hunting on an area that was all timber. I mean, it was just thick stuff. Never been there, didn't know where I was. I had crossed a cutover, that is a logged out area, and found me a good spot. Well, when I came out, this cutover was massive. And so in the dark, I crossed the cutover again. And I kept walking and no road, nothing. I turned around, backtracked. I did this for hours. And again, eventually I saw a floodlight off in the distance, and I headed towards it. I went up and knocked on the house. Now, when I knocked on this house, this old man came to the door. He probably was about my age now, but back then he looked old. This old man came to the door. He didn't ask me a question. He saw me in all my camo gear, and he looks and turns around and he says to his wife, "We have another one." Evidently, that was a normal thing. People ended up at his house lost in that large cutover. Got in my truck, and he drove me around for what seemed like forever until we found my vehicle. Again, I had enough sense to follow the light and to move in the direction of the light. The last story was my son and I were splunking in Belize in a cave that we had been in many, many times. My wife and daughter and some of the other people that were in the mission team were on the outside waiting for us. It's broad daylight outside. We go in the cave. We've got some, it was either a youth or a college team that was visiting. We're taking them in there, my wife, my son and I, and we have some flashlights. When you came into this cave, there was a big opening. But if over in one of the corners was a small opening, I mean literally small. Now, I was much smaller then, much more fit than I am now. And that opening probably couldn't have been any more than 2 foot by 2 foot. And it went upward. It was at the base of that large cave, and it went upward. It went upward for about 15 to 20 yards. And so my son and I had been in there before. You would crawl on your belly up through there like a snake, one at a time, and then it would open up into a room that was even bigger than the other. And that room was filled with Mayan, broken Mayan pottery and stuff, and there was an underground river. It was just an incredible cave when you got in there. Well, we had made that journey in there, and we're exploring that with all these other youth. And all of a sudden, the flashlights, it was like on cue, all the flashlights start going bad. Some of them were flickering, everything like that. Some of the youth were getting a little afraid. And so I told my son, I said, we need to find that hole to be able to get out. Because see, coming out, it was a hole that went down. And the way it was, when you shine your light in that direction, the shadows from the rocks of the side of the cave would fall down and would hide the hole. So all of a sudden, our flashlights are getting dimmer and dimmer. And we're down to like 2 flashlights that are very, very dim. My son is afraid. He mentions to me, I said, son, don't tell them I can't find the hole. Because I couldn't find the hole. I had no idea where that hole was. I said, don't tell them. I said, they're scared enough. And if they know that we're about out of light in this dark, dark place and I can't find the way out, that's going to just terrorize them. But I told my son, I said, we need to pray. And we prayed. And I said, now, son, don't go far. We're going to split up. We need to find that hole. And so we started looking. And the lights are getting dimmer and dimmer, and finally we find that hole. I was never so glad in my life to find the hole. I kept sending them down. Now, when they got at the bottom of that hole into the first cave, you could see the opening coming in. It's broad daylight outside, and you could see it. But where we were, you could not see the opening, and so there was no light. God provided for us, answered our prayer, gave us the way out, and we made our way out. I want to tell you something. You cannot escape the temptation if you refuse to follow the prompting and the light that the Lord provides. God gives His children special light, discernment, conviction, people to follow in every temptation, but you cannot be delivered from it if you refuse to respond to His light. So don't blame God when you cave in to the temptation. In every Christian, there is a giant presence of light known as God's presence. The more you follow it, the more victory you will have over temptation. Love you, Stewart's Chapel.